In the last months of World War II, several units of the Royal Hungarian Army and the Levente paramilitary organization were evacuated to Germany to avoid Soviet captivity. The country's puppet regime was waiting for the wonder weapons to arrive, while the Germans used these units for various purposes. Some of them ended up in Denmark, replacing German occupation troops that were sent to the front at the same time. Their story is largely forgotten, but it does deserve an episode nonetheless. By early 1945, most of Hungary was under Soviet occupation. The country's government and the remaining armed forces, along with the Levente Youth Organization and the Gold Reserves, were evacuated to Germany. Among these units were the 90th, 91st, and the 92nd Replacement and Training Regiments, as well as the 3rd Battalion of 82nd and 3rd Battalion of 93rd Replacement and Training Regiments that were in Jutland in Denmark. The remainder of the 93rd Replacement and Training Regiment was near Copenhagen on the island of Zeeland, while around 400 soldiers were sent to the island of Bornholm. After resisting German orders to join combat units, roughly 50 cadets and officers from the Csaba Királyfi Military High School also arrived in Zeeland from Bergen, Germany. Officially, these newly conscripted Hungarian soldiers were to be trained in Denmark before being sent to the front. However, they were instead ordered to guard railway lines, bridges, and other key locations to prevent sabotage, or they were simply used as free labor. They were typically given only a few or no cartridges, while at night they were guarded, watched by German soldiers. At first, the locals didn't know what to think of them. They were clearly not Germans, but their uniform was strange. Over time, they realized that the Hungarians did not come on their own volition, they were not crazy about the war, and they just wanted to stay alive and return home as soon as possible. Outside the capital, along the Nordbahnen railway line, the population was friendly towards them. They received lunches from high school students. One soldier gave away his carbine for a sausage, while another guard sold his carbine for 100 cigarettes after a fake holdup organized by the local resistance. Relations were not always amicable. On one occasion, a young girl was killed on her way home from a visit to the cinema by a Hungarian patrol because she did not obey orders. Still, this was rare, and at most locations there was zero violence. Decades later, one of the Hungarian soldiers, István Kiss, shared some of his memories in a televised interview. He remarked that their first encounter in Denmark was with a young boy who gave them a cake, something that they had rarely seen before. They were surprised that the stores were full of goods, the people looked healthy, and their houses were intact and in good condition. Being so far away from home, keeping traditions and religious beliefs were important. On Good Friday, a Hungarian officer requested the parish priest of Lönnborg to deliver an Easter service for the soldiers, and the priest agreed. The event went well, and the locals realized that these Hungarians were not occupiers, but in reality, they were treated by the Germans as prisoners of war. A memorial stone can be found there even today, emphasizing that the Danes saw the human behind the enemy's uniform. It was a turning point after which several key moments followed. Even before the end of the war, some Hungarian officers contacted the Danish resistance movement, promising cooperation with Allied forces in case of an invasion against the German occupation forces. This was not a completely selfless act. In northern Zeeland, a Hungarian battalion developed excellent relations with the highest levels of the resistance, out of which a deal was born. The Hungarians would support the resistance fighters in exchange for a guarantee that their wives and children would be protected in case of a German capitulation, providing safe passage back to Hungary as much as possible. In the Birkeröd district outside Copenhagen, the Hungarian commander struck a similar deal after negotiations. According to this agreement, they would place themselves under Danish command with the special task of defeating nearby German forces in case fighting broke out. This was not such a distinct possibility. Also, in April 1945, a Hungarian unit in Copenhagen was ordered to move to Berlin and participate in the defense of the German capital. Instead of marching into their death, the Hungarians broke out of the barracks at Rosenborg Castle and began to disperse. The Germans used force to stop and collect them, and in the shooting, 8 Danish civilians died. It is not certain what happened to the captured Hungarians, but according to some sources, many of them were eventually executed by the Germans at Kastrup Fortress. Another Hungarian unit was stationed in the west, near the coast in Jutland. Their task was to locate landed British planes to confiscate their cargo and capture the crews. As István Kis explained in his interview, they didn't always follow their orders. On many occasions, they simply ignored Allied planes and the cargo they had dropped. Not long after the Easter service, a British Handley Page Halifax heavy bomber was damaged by German anti-aircraft guns, so it had to perform an emergency landing at Ringkøbing Fjord. A nearby Hungarian patrol located the plane, but instead of capturing the crew, men from Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, they turned a blind eye. Some members of the Danish resistance also arrived to save the airmen, which they did. They also pumped the remaining fuel out of the plane, replacing it with water, while the Hungarians pretended that they didn't see anything. Sometime later, German officers arrived on the scene, but they could not determine if something suspicious had happened or the Hungarians were just unlucky and barely missed the action. Once the German capitulation took place in May, British troops arrived to liberate Denmark, together with the local resistance that had also emerged from its hiding places. Apart from a handful of special units that received more time to prepare, all Hungarian soldiers had to leave the country as soon as possible. Most of them ended up in prisoner of war camps in Schleswig-Holstein and other parts of Germany. However, cadets of the military school and all family members, civilians, received some protection from the Red Cross, which also meant that the soldiers lost contact with them until their eventual return to Hungary in 1946. Thus, due to the British pressure, roughly 10,000 Hungarian soldiers in Jutland, along with their 2,000 comrades in Zeeland, had to leave. However, they were still more fortunate than some others. The island of Bornholm was occupied by the Red Army, and a Hungarian unit of 400 soldiers was also captured by them. They were much less lenient with the Hungarians, who were sent to Russian prisoner of war camps, from which many never returned. It is interesting that even today, some visible signs of the Hungarian occupation can still be found in Denmark. For example, in the forests near Holte in Zeeland and Vejle in Jutland, there are 2 Hungarian trees with easily recognizable carvings on them. We can find the names, the Hungarian coat of arms, and the Creed of Trianon, referring to the national trauma that resulted from the post-World War I peace treaty and the country's dismemberment. Also in the Nivang Museum in Zeeland, a cart of Hungarian origin is exhibited. This was used by some of the soldiers to arrive in Denmark. Their story was largely forgotten until the Danish journalist Søren Peter Sørensen published his book titled The Hungarian Soldiers in 2005. Thanks to his work, another piece of the puzzle fell in place.